and gentlemen, welcome to Tuesday Night Violence on UCY. This is PrimerTime. My name is Michael, and I'm kind of bewildered by the whole fact. Nick is off tonight. I have just two awesome guests on with me tonight. I have Chris from Voice of Rebellion Radio. What's going on, Chris?
Hey, man. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate it. And I got Lady Pitbull, I believe, who used to co-host with Jules on Before the First Cup here. You there? Maybe not. She'll join us here in a second. So, Chris, how's life treating you? You just survived a great worldwide experience. What was the name of your hurricane that just passed over your area?
Oh, we had a Hermine pass through on Thursday. Over here, we didn't get the worst effects, but we had, overnight, we had 60, 65 mile an hour winds over here in St. Pete. And we had some serious storm surges down by the water, but I live away from the water, so flooding wasn't too bad here. Up by Cedar Key, they had some serious winds up there, and that's where we really saw some of the hurricane-force winds. But either way, it was a pretty crazy storm. I would say that I've been through now, that's number 11 I've lived through, tropical storms. I've lived through one hurricane, 10 tropical storms, and that's in the top 3 probably. And I lived through Charlie, so that's saying something.
Okay, so this is something that kind of relates definitely to this show. In the aftermath of these hurricanes, and you got lucky on this one because there wasn't massive amounts of destruction and looting, but like we could look to something like what happened after Katrina, or even just recently after the big floods in Louisiana and Baton Rouge. There's a significant amount of, shall we say, requisitioning of other people's products for whatever purposes they may be, and it doesn't matter if those products are currently being used by you, somebody will try to take them. And we didn't see a whole lot of that this time. Did you see any of that?
No, we didn't have too much of that in this area because the power didn't. Only a few customers around here lost power. I mean, Tampa Bay area lost something like 2,300 lost power. That might have been one company only, but over in this area, the winds weren't too high. They weren't high enough really to knock out a significant amount of people's power. So I didn't see any personally kind of looting or anything like that. Who knows? Maybe in a few neighborhoods east of here, that might have been a little bit different story. But over here, we lucked out.
Okay, so when you say a few neighborhoods east of you, what kind of distance are you talking about?
I would say from the worst of the city. I'm talking about the worst neighborhood in the city where a lot of the crime happens, where we have drive-by shootings that are not rare at all, and we have significant amount of drug dealing in this area. That's probably about 4 or 5 miles east of where I live, and the not as bad neighborhood, but what some people would consider rough, is only about a mile away from here. So, that's
a mile can be traversed in quite a rapid fashion when there is a large goody goal at the end, whether that goal be a big screen TV or all your spam and Little Debbie's you have, jacked up into the closet, or a healthy baby, kind of makes you think. I kind of have an idea of your situation, and would you have felt better prepared with better armaments?
Oh, that's for sure. If I had, for example, just a rifle or anything like that, I think it would have put a little bit more peace of mind because it was very close. That storm that came by at 3 in the morning, if it just had a little bit more winds, or that stayed the winds only stayed about 15 minutes, where we had 60 to 65 mile an hour winds, which can easily knock out the power. It's actually quite fortunate that we didn't have the power knocked out, considering our weak grid that we have in the Tampa Bay area, especially by the coast. And if the wind was a bit stronger, if it was at 80 instead of 60, I'm sure we would have lost power. And at 3 in the morning, that's a very scary time to lose power when you're talking about these kind of neighborhoods being not very far from my residence.
Yeah, a mile down a mile down paved roads can be covered in rapid fashion. And, well, as you've seen, like what happened with Katrina, and cops weren't there to protect you. I mean, there's several videos of cops actually joining in the looting of, a Walmart and other things. And then there's all sorts of extrajudicial activities by police and by what are loosely termed as vigilante groups, which I think in times of crisis, I think that's almost a slur against them. I think they're providing neighborhood protection. And it's really an important subject to consider. I mean, especially for everybody who lives on the Gulf Coast. If you live on the Gulf Coast of the United States and you don't have some sort of, I guess, preparations for inclement weather, if nothing else, you're living in a fantasy land. I think really you should have at least 3 days of water and 3 days worth of food, and quite possibly more. I mean, I live in, on the Gulf Coast here in Texas, and I remember after Hurricane Ike, which honestly was supposed to hit us and then took a jag north and smacked just a little bit north of Houston in the Crystal Beach area, and they were out of power for 2 weeks in a lot of places. And it's not necessarily a temperate time of year. Mid-September in Texas is still pretty damn warm. I mean, we hit 90-something today.
Well, it's funny you mention that because I was looking at my Facebook today, and I was wondering, it's been a few days since the hurricane up there, and I have a couple people that were right by the eye wall where the worst of the weather hit about 1 in the morning, early Friday morning. The eye wall went through St. Mark's in Tallahassee, and I have a couple friends up there in Tallahassee, and they're saying they're still out power to this day, 5 days later. And Florida is a very bad climate in August, September. You're talking about temperatures of 90 to 95 degrees, and with the humidity that happens after a storm, you get dumped on by a deluge of rain for a few days. You're talking about anywhere from 1 to 3 feet of rain. Here we got easily a foot of rain, maybe a foot and a half of rain. So the humidity, heat index, that's terrible. 120 degrees you're talking about.
Well, I've seen that. I've seen that the large amount of rain coming in will cause all sorts of problems. So if we're going to take this show in this direction, if you live on the Gulf Coast, it would probably behoove you to own a few sandbags and the means to fill them. Water coming into a house, it'd be nice to be able to keep the water out of the house. We can look to some of our friends in Baton Rouge. We got a friend of the show, Mr. Bond, who is in the Baton Rouge area, and there was a lot of flooding in that, and maybe a couple of sandbags wouldn't have worked for a lot of the people, but you got to do what you can do. What sort of preparations do you make for a loss of power? Do you own a generator? You have access to a generator or something like that for when power goes down?
To be honest, I do not own a generator. Neither do it is unfortunate probably how ill-prepared a lot of us are for a hurricane, and I don't think many of my neighbors have generators as well. Really, we just have the essentials. I mean, we have the hand crank radio, a few flashlights laying around, so at least we can get around the house without tripping on something. But we do have the basics for water, because when the power goes out, a lot of times also the water, when it's flooding like that, the water will stop pumping into the houses, and then without water, you're in serious trouble. So you should have at least some water for a hurricane, and definitely some non-perishable food, because you might be without an oven or anything to cook your food with for a few days.
I'd like to welcome Wendy, Lady Pitbull, to the show. How are you doing?
Hey, Amy, how are you?
Not too bad. Good to hear you
again.
Awesome.
Yeah,
man. Me and Chris. Chris is a host of Voice of Rebellion Radio here on Sunday nights.
How's it going, Chris? Hey, thanks a lot for having me, man. Usually, at this time of night, I'm coming home on Tuesdays from my Commando Krav Maga class.
No, you're still taking jujitsu.
Yes, jujitsu indeed.
Ever thought you had to like poke little kids in the eyes with like keys or anything yet?
Not yet. But I did just put a Hillary for
You
prison.
go to like the Tel Aviv training for that, I think.
Yeah, I did just put a Hillary for prison sticker on my car, and I'm driving around like the People's Republic of Ann Arbor, so I'm expecting some rain there.
I would hope to God you have some Kevlar on those windows.
Right? Poke some liberal in the eyes, you know? Oh,
So,
crazy. You guys are talking about... Say again?
aftermath of destruction, of natural destruction, and kind of what goes along with that. And you being in a different area have completely different concerns than we do. So you would more likely be concerned with a great big storm that knocks out your power for a couple days due to ice.
Oh, yeah. That happens here quite a bit, in fact.
You get storms
But
like
there's
that, you end up
also...
with a lot of looters.
What's that?
Get storms like that, do you end up with a lot of looters or anything?
When, let's see, there was quite a few years ago, the power went out here for almost a week, and it was down on the whole East Coast. Remember that? I actually, it was quite a few years ago now, but when I was driving around in that, I actually saw, it was pretty cool too, a bunch of militia guys just sitting at the front of their driveway with their arms and their flashlights, and they were just sitting there just, you know, protecting their property. That was kind of cool. I was like, whoa, check that out.
That is the Second Amendment action. There's that protecting your home and property, I think exceeds the sporting use criteria.
Absolutely. I 100% agree.
So,
you guys were talking about preparedness. I've got just like a metal trash can that has all of my batteries just stuffed into it, and that, you know, in case of a coronal CME from the sun, you know, because that will take out the grid too.
there's a lot of stuff going on, and yeah, if like a coronal mass ejection or there was some sort of electromagnetic pulse from some sort of nuclear device or something, there's a lot of things that can work, and a lot of things that are exposed. So I mean, we could get into the whole thing about having a Faraday cage to keep your electronics intact. Do you park your vehicle in a metal garage that would dissipate those electromagnetic waves? And what happens afterwards? I mean, okay, so like Chris, in your area, after a hurricane, would you necessarily want to be out in the backyard having a great big old barbecue and filling the neighborhood full of smoky goodness of, you know, barbecue pork ribs and, you know, maybe some sort of shellfish or something like that? To me, I personally think no, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I would probably stay away from that. You know, if we're talking about the real worst case scenario, we're talking about the Cat 3 or something like that, makes direct landfall somewhere nearby, and the power's out for most of the people here in the St. Pete area, and especially, you know, that's going to draw some of the people out of the rougher neighborhoods for sure, looking for food or anything. Because, you know, I'm sure that one of the things that would happen is that all of the emergency response and whatnot, it would take days before they would even be handing out food, and I'm sure that they would be probably towards the end of that response team. So they're going to be going to desperate measures within just a few days. This area definitely has, it's definitely it's going to a more from a suburb to an urban setting. So you can imagine that would not be a wise idea in that scenario.
I think that's quite wise to recognize what area you were in and what the limitations of that area is. I don't think it's necessarily any sort of, I guess it gets into like a racial animosity or anything, but it's just the way things happen. I think everybody needs to be prepared, number one, to provide for you and your loved ones, and to defend you and your loved ones, because after a while, I don't know if either of you agree with me, but I think that people will go to ungodly and what we would consider horrible lengths to stop the screaming of a hungry child. And that could happen real easy.
Well, just look at what happened in the war, and look what happened during. You know what's an example of? I think it really strikes home. It would really strike home to Americans. You know how in a disaster, whether it's war or natural disaster, when the war happened over there in Bosnia and Serbia, it's a European country. This is not a country, in Africa. I think that this would really drive home the point to Americans that just the horrors that took place because the grocery store got bombed. NATO went in and bombed all the places, all the food warehouses. All the people went to all kinds of horrors that are unspeakable. A lot of the people that survived this war almost can't talk about it. It was so barbaric. Some people, the lengths that they went to just to feed themselves. So it could very easily happen. For example, besides this natural disaster, the EMP happens, which is a very likely possibility. It's a very modern 21st century attack that could definitely be levied against one country or another, whether the United States levies it against Russia or Russia levies it against us. And when that happens, just imagine the cease and shit.
Absolutely. People better be having this stuff on their mind. And that whole thing in Bosnia, we can thank the CIA and Bill Clinton for that. But, yeah, people aren't thinking about this kind of stuff at all. And when you got when something happens, and this is what I call the zombie apocalypse, when the lights go out and people don't have access to their pharmaceutical medicines, and then they start starving within 3 days, it's going to be the zombie apocalypse right then and there when you got people, that don't have their meds flipping out and on the streets running around trying to get food. Wow. I mean, people have to put this stuff in perspective.
That's kind of a scary thought. Off the McDonald's and off the Prozac at the same time.
Exactly. I mean, bam, that's it. No cigarettes, no food, no heroin. I mean, God.
Yeah. Well, you take all the fun. You just took all the fun out of an emergency.
Well, as soon as the football goes off the TV, man, it's going to be.
You know what? I firmly believe that as soon as there's no more football and no more 99-cent McMenu, heads are going to roll.
It's true, man.
And it doesn't even have to be a natural disaster or a violent event like say a hurricane or a snowstorm or an EMP or war. It could be something like what's going on in Venezuela right now. Venezuela's in a great big huge mess, and their people are starving. They're looting zoos. People are having like roast wildebeest for dinner because there's no McDonald's.
Let me chime in before anyone starts talking about Venezuela. Just I want everyone to be reminded that the stuff that's going on in Venezuela right now is a big part. The fault goes to the United States government, it goes to the Israeli government, and it goes to the European governments for sanctioning and practically locking them out completely, like they did to Cuba, like they did to Vietnam after the war. They have put such strict embargoes, and also the Saudis for dropping the price of oil down to the point where now not only Venezuela is suffering like this, my country, Colombia, is suffering as well, where the prices of food have went up 8 times. This is a regional drought that's happening. And in Venezuela, a lot of it is foreign-related, the suffering, and they're doing this for one reason, is that the money people want to cause the collapse of the Venezuelan civilization, and probably most importantly, the Venezuelan government, and replace it with Capriles Radowski and his more pro-money people government that he would bring about.
We do see the money influence in Venezuela, where a lot of the companies and the corporations and the retailers are acting against. I don't want to exalt the Venezuelan government, but they're really acting against the Venezuelan people to hurt the Venezuelan government, and
Right.
that gets really ugly really fast. And that could happen here. I mean, remember that
There's already doing it here.
absolutely. I mean, it happens in places. I mean, a lot of the inner city neighborhoods are what they refer to now as food deserts. The only thing that you got to choose from is the gas station, the convenience store, maybe the Family Dollar or the Dollar General. And for anybody who's had to like actually do any sort of shopping from only those places for an extended period of time, you notice the definite decline in the quality of food over time. And that's a great big impact psychologically on people.
And physically,
I mean,
and they're already starting to sell dollar steaks at the Dollar General. They're these thin pieces of crap that they're trying to pawn off as steaks. And so when you have a steady diet of that stuff, and I mean, it's
a dollar steak scares the hell out of me.
That sounds disgusting.
I will say that I did screw up, and I went to my local Family Dollar, and I bought some of those freezer pizzas, those cheap-ass freezer pizzas, but these are even, like, less than the Totinos. They were, I don't know, Mr. P brand freezer pizzas, just some crappy little box. And they tasted fairly decent and whatever, you know, it was good for a quick dinner. And as soon as I finished them, I ended up looking at the back of the package, and it was made with processed, genetically engineered ingredients. And so keep an eyeball out for that kind of stuff too.
yeah, for sure. For sure. You're exactly right, though, Chris. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that I can imagine it's going to come to this point where that's going to be the only food that's going to be affordable for a big portion of this population, especially. What I look to when people talk about what the future economics of this country might look to or might be like, just remember what happened to Germany. Germany was a very prosperous, thriving country in 1917, and then once the war ended and the entire world started to take revenge on them, their economy crashed. And more importantly, the banks took revenge on them. And then for the next 10 years, they lived in such a miserable hellhole that people practically reverted back to living like people in the Stone Age at one point and during the 1920s in Germany. And there's nothing to stop it from happening here in the United States today when we have our fiat currency that at one point could just collapse.
You're exactly right.
I get scared about the currency because I think it's fairly unstable to the point where we're almost at the mercy of, let's just say, a guy at a dock in Bangladesh who's got a couple containers full of, you know, daddy's little princess nightgowns and, you know, towels for Walmart, and he says, no, I don't think I want dollars. I think I'd rather be paid in something else. And that it could be something as simple as that kicks off the dominoes falling. And then we end up with a situation like Venezuela or, you know, God forbid, Bosnia, or even something as natural versus man-made as something like Katrina. And then we see in the after effects of Katrina, we saw, and it wasn't really well publicized in the media, but people who pay attention, there were law enforcement of whatever flavor they were that were taking guns from people, that were collecting firearms.
That was the military totally breaking the posse comitatus, going door to door. They did it with local law enforcement and military, army.
I have no doubt about that. There's I believe it's question 46 that is part of a questionnaire given out to some Marines at the 29 Palms base back in the mid-'80s, where they asked, would you be willing to fire on civilians, on American civilians, in time of a national firearms roundup? And that drug out some I'd say it drug out a little bit of energy and a little bit of opinion over that subject, which kind of brings me to a question that I was asked earlier in the week by a good friend and a listener of the show, David and Shirley in Florida. How you guys doing? The question is about concealed weapon permits. And are you in favor of a concealed weapon permit or not? And Chris, I'd like to get you to give me kind of what you know as a history of firearms registration in some of the more revolutionary areas, and then I can give my opinion. And Lady Pitbull, if you want to say what you feel about it, I think we all kind of have an interesting take on this.
Well, it's obvious what has happened after guns have been registered and then confiscated in the years after. In Germany, we had gun confiscation to non-citizens in the 1930s, and then and the citizen was a very subjective term at that point. Stalin, he took away the guns in 1929, which was about the same year that that was Trotsky was exiled. I'm pretty sure a lot of the other undesirables of the country, people that he had deemed a threat to his complete autocracy of the country, were exiled. And he took the guns away for the next 16 years. Under that point, during the purges, anybody who was left inside of Russia and the Soviet Union, the other countries inside of the Union, were subjected to, the enemies of him were subjected to gulags. Many of them worked to death, and the numbers go anywhere from 20 to 40 million. I think that the general historical consensus goes somewhere around 30 million if you factor in Holodomor in Ukraine. Mao's China, there was definitely gun confiscation, and especially during the Cultural Revolution in the 60s, where Mao pretty much erased all the traces of the former China under the Republic, from the 40s and the 30s and prior to that. He pretty much erased all the traditional Chinese culture and replaced it with the new revolutionary, I guess, culture. And during that time, he took away the guns, and he took away the food from many of the farmers that had grown the food and gave it to the industrialists, the people that were actually working on the products, turning China into a superpower of manufacturing, but at the same time starving all those farmers. And death toll goes anywhere from 40 to 80 million. I think a historical consensus goes around 45 million would be without any much of exaggeration. There was also a much more closer to the United States example right there in Guatemala, not too far from the United States at all. In 1954, the United States government initiated a coup inside of Guatemala, removing Jacobo Arbenez from power and bringing about a military junta, which later, by disarming citizens, was able to kill 200,000 native Guatemalans that had been there since prior to the time of the Spanish conquest. These were the descendants of the actual natives to Guatemala. If you go over to Cambodia, where one of the most horrific genocides of modern history happened, Pol Pot disarmed his people in just a matter of 2 years after Kissinger, also working with Mao, the United States and China very openly, not even that much of a conspiracy theory to say that U.S. and China worked together to bring about Pol Pot to destabilize Southeast Asia from the breakaway of countries where China was losing its influence on, of Vietnam and Laos. They wanted to put a republic of their own that they have a lot of influence with, and so did the United States, so they worked together and collaborated to bring about Pol Pot. Pol Pot then killed 2 to 3 million of his people, which in a country that only has 8 million of the total population, that you're talking about in many places, 50% of the city or even entire villages completely wiped out. And the list goes on and on and on.
All right, so historically we see that lists are not good. Wendy, how do you feel about not necessarily lists, but the concealed weapon permit?
Well, I just got to say, Chris, you know your history, and you're absolutely accurate, except that I think maybe with Stalin it was more like 80 million between him and Lenin. So, but that's, the rest, you're right on the money, man. That whole 1968 licensure of firearms should have never have happened in the first place. We shouldn't need to have permits because Michigan here is an open carry state. But I don't think that we should be licensed at all to have any permits whatsoever. The Second Amendment is the Second Amendment, and obviously what is shall not be infringed. Do you not understand, people? We've all heard that a million times. So, they're starting to talk about confiscating firearms from people who have medical marijuana cards. I read that recently.
Stoners. Those
Right.
people on the devil's lettuce. So
yeah,
the way
let them come here and try and take them from me. You know what I mean? There's a lot of people out there that think the same way.
Now, is Michigan a castle doctrine state? We all know that Florida is a castle doctrine state.
It is. Yes, it certainly is. And in fact, the Detroit police chief, James Craig, encouraged the castle doctrine and encourages people to defend their own property and says, somebody breaks into your house, you take them out with your gun and your firearms. And a lot of people started stepping up and doing that. And Detroit has a lot less crime than, say, Chicago, and points thereof. So, Michigan's definitely a castle doctrine state, as well as open carry.
You brought up Chicago, and I'd just like to say that there was 13 between yesterday and this morning that were killed, and 29 shootings, and that was just for yesterday. That was just for Labor Day. There were other shootings throughout the rest of the week. So Chicago's an interesting example of that. Personally, I think if you live in a castle doctrine state, fuck it. Do not buy a concealed weapons permit. I've got no problem with somebody taking the concealed weapon permit training and becoming familiar with that. I'm all for getting as much training and education as you can. Personally, I at least in Texas, the castle doctrine pretty much allows you to carry a firearm on your person in your place of business, in your domicile, and that can include your hotel room, if you're going camping, if you're sleeping in a motorhome, that's your domicile, and it allows you that same privilege of the firearm while you're traveling, as long as it's concealed. Now, this may be kind of contrary to the popular legal wisdom or anything, but I kind of see it in a no harm, no foul sort of way. If you have one, carry it. Carry it as the law prescribes. But let's say you have to go to the Walmart in the middle of the night in a bad neighborhood, and I'd say definitely carry it at that point. I'd say that you quote unquote breaking the law is, to me, is far more preferable than to having somebody injured because they weren't able to defend themselves. And honestly, 99.9% of the time, if you don't do something stupid with the gun, nobody's going to ever know you had it.
Right.
So, and to me, that also goes into one of my favorite subjects. A small concealable pistol of a significant caliber is a must. I personally like them to be thin. I don't necessarily need them to be short, but I like them to be very thin. And I think those conceal better on my big old lumpy frame. I think that the lists with the concealed weapons also can almost be applied to the NRA, the National Rifle Association, which a lot of people will say comes out to be the National Registry Association. And I think we just lost Chris. But I think if it came down to it, and there was going to be a time where the government wanted to absolutely get that list, not that they don't have it already,
Right.
I don't think there's anything stopping them from marching 400 ATF agents into the headquarters of the NRA and pointing rifles at the secretary and saying, "Give us the list."
Right, which they could do. I think the problem that they're starting to have now is that I don't think that they're going to have enough manpower to do all of that. To tell you the truth, because there's a lot of military waking up, there's a lot of cops waking up to this whole thing, and my instructor is one of them. He's a Washtenaw County sheriff's deputy, and he freaking can't stand Hillary Clinton, and he knows what's coming down the pike. And he's like, and I asked him flat out, I said, will the sheriff deputies go door to door to confiscate weapons? And they're like, and he said to me, everybody knows. Everybody in the police force knows that would be completely suicide, and no one is willing to do that.
Well, I think you're absolutely correct. And your friend is absolutely correct. And due to that, I think they will not use American military, and I don't think they'll use American law enforcement. I mean, I think they'll use more American law enforcement and probably some sold-out military, but I think the brunt of any sort of collection that would happen in the United States will be done by the blue helmets. And straight up right now, I'll say it, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it since I've been saying it. Blue helmets get bullets.
Yep.
Shoot for the forehead. Put
Right.
them fucking Pakistanis down, because that's what it's going to be. It's going to be about 800,000 Pakistanis, just like they send everywhere else. The Pakistanis are there to die, and that's what they're going to come here.
Yeah, and they will die.
I believe so. It's good to hear that. It's good to hear that.
There's no doubt about that. Blue helmets, I mean, no.
Yeah, blue helmets get bullets. And I mean, I've known that since a kid. And I mean, we can even see this in some of the, I think some of the more seminal movie events and media events in my life. And one of the things I don't like to reference movies a whole lot, but there was the movie Red Dawn in 1980.
I love that movie.
That was probably one of the movies that made like the largest footprint on my brain as a Ute. And there's a scene in that movie where the Cuban commander, the commander of the invading Cuban forces, is yelling at one of his underlings to go to the local sporting goods store and look for a yellow form 4473, which gives the owners of the weapons. And that's before I ever went out and bought a firearm. And that just kind of like stuck in my head for some reason all the way since then until now. And I think that's a very, very good possibility. I think that's something they're planning for. And honestly, there's a lot of discussion with Hillary saying how she's really a proponent of Australian-style gun control. And, that just wouldn't happen here.
No. And you're right, that scene in the movie was them going and getting the list of firearms owners around the area. And they, their databases are a lot more evolved since back when that movie was made. So.
Oh yeah. Back then it was ditto papers and mimeographs and stuff and yellow sheets.
And filing cabinets.
Right.
Yeah.
And now it's all available at 3 clicks of a mouse button. So
exactly. So is he back?
Yes,
I
back.
don't know. Cool.
Right on.
So Wendy, you've got a little bit more firearms experience than Chris. What would you consider to be a good concealable weapon for you? Is there anything that you've looked at and you've said, "Hey, I like that"?
Yeah, there was a Smith & Wesson 357 that I shot a couple weeks back, and I don't think it had 357 caliber in there. I think it was a lesser caliber, but it shot like butter. It was so wonderful. I was like, dude, I gotta shoot that again. It was really nice. And myself, personally, I've got my grandpa's old pistol that's just a tiny little detective special. It's right there. It's like just a 5-shot revolver. Gets the job done. You know what I mean? But I mean, if you're gonna be, if you're just talking about self-defense, home self-defense, that's kind of nice. But I mean, if we're like running around after blue helmets, you're gonna want something, a sidearm that's a lot more significant in power. You know what I mean? Because if you're getting close to a blue helmet guy, you're gonna want to blow a hole pretty big if you're that close enough for a pistol. I guess it depends on the situation you're in. Yeah.
The 5-shot revolver, like you're speaking about, Colt made the detective, and then Smith & Wesson made a J-frame, which is almost the exact same size and same function. I personally prefer the Smith & Wesson lock work versus the Colt lock.
I have the Colt.
How you open up the cylinder. I like how Smith & Wesson, you push that button forward. I don't necessarily like how Colt you have to pull the little button backwards.
Pull it backwards, yeah. Yeah, I got the Colt kind.
I like Ruger's release the best, which is a button you depress downward. My only problem with the Ruger is they're very heavy, which is its only drawback, because that heaviness translates into ultimate build quality and reliability. They're usually made from a single billeted piece of whatever the material is, if it's stainless or if it's blued steel. So they're quite reliable, quite well made, but they are a tad heavy. They require a decent holster. I do not mean that black $9.99 Uncle Mike's holster from your big box retailer, and probably a good belt. I'm personally a fan of a small semi-automatic. I really like the SIG 938. I'm more of a single action pistol fan along the lines of like a 1911 or a high power. And the SIG 938 is a single action pistol that has controls in the exact same place and manner as a 1911 or a high power. And to me, that's it makes it a lot easier. I feel far more comfortable with it that way. It's not something that I ever have to think about. It's something that it's been ingrained in me, since I was a child. This is how this works, and that's just like in opposition to something that's quite popular right now, which would be like the Beretta 92, which has a safety mounted on the slide rather than on the frame, and you move that safety up to take it off of safe. To me, that's just not that action seems counterintuitive to me.
Yeah, I got a buddy who's got a variety of SIGs, and those are pretty awesome little weapons to shoot, I gotta say. Did we lose him again?
My big problem with SIGs is the magazines are so damn expensive.
Yeah. Is Chris back?
No, I'm still here. It cut me off for like a second, started getting choppy, then it booted me out, but I'm back.
Right on.
We're discussing things that are not necessarily discussed in polite society anymore. We're discussing things that if we were to actually title the video for tonight's YouTube, we would have a hard time posting it. We'd end up having to call this like Pokemon Kardashian Ferrari or something just to be able to get it on. I'm not joking. I'll give you an example. A few weeks ago, Nick and I did a show, and it was about the time of that Munich, where that guy in Munich went out and shot up everybody, and that's another interesting story when you get into that guy's firearm and all that. But so we covered the Munich massacre. We covered Hillary and Tim Kaine giving their usual anti-gun screed, and then we also covered somebody who was playing Pokemon or something and got robbed and ended up shooting it out with somebody and, saved himself. And so our title was going to be Munich Massacre, Tim Kaine, Hillary, and Pokemon Go shooting. And they wouldn't let us use the words massacre or shooting in the title. Like, it wouldn't accept it. So...
Well, come October 1st, when Obama turns the whole internet over to the UN, it's going to get a lot worse, a lot quicker. I mean...
Well, there's other things going on October 1st that people should be aware of. I think the biggest thing that happens October 1st is the fiscal year flips over.
Oh.
And
explain that.
That's when the books start all over again. It's a brand new year. And so they have to have everything old off the books. That's not going to be a loss by that time or carried forward. And then they restart again. And usually, as we've seen in the past, October is about the time that crises start, and then they usually peak sometime around March. And we're right around the corner from that. So go out and buy yourself a box of ammo tonight. I'd like to give a shout out to my SLC who happened to get himself a hold of some of that fine 22 long rifle ammunition from CCI.
Right on. How much did that run him?
I think he said he paid $7.50 a box for it, and it was, but it was some of CCI's new stuff, and they call it a copper 22, which is almost a joke to me because it's actually copper dust and polymer compressed into a bullet, and it's a bullet that's half the size of, or actually not half the size, it's half the weight of previous bullets. And CCI actually used to call it a different name. I think they called it Eco Green or something like that, or Eco Friendly ammo. And
Eco Friendly. Oh my God, I haven't heard that yet.
Oh yeah, because they made that a couple years ago, and there was a big push because in California they're eliminating all the lead ammunition, and this new stuff is just basically it's compressed polymer and copper dust, and it comes out at a bullet weight that's about half the size of other comparable 22 long rifle loads, with the exception that it gives a much faster velocity. And as we all know, if you get a gummy bear moving fast enough, you can put it through a half-inch thick steel plate.
Dang, man.
Yeah, it's all about the velocity. It's all about the velocity.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I know he got...
You could call this episode Pokey Bears and Pokemon and Gummy Bears. You can call them.
You know what? And we probably get a whole bunch of extra listeners on that, and then somebody would leave a note saying this had nothing to do with gummy bears.
Well, yeah. Well, it's a flat of gummy bear. It's high velocity. Hey.
Wow. So congratulations to him. 22 long rifle has been kind of hard to find, especially at the main big box retailer in the United States, which is Walmart. I know at my local sporting goods big box retailer, they have quite a bit of 22 long rifle, but they limit how much you can purchase, which I think lets them not get blown out quite on the regular. Cabela's has been fairly well stocked every time I've been in there recently, and Gander Mountain too, but I don't like Gander Mountain's price. I think Gander Mountain should actually be called Gouger Mountain.
Yeah. So, as opposed to the $7.50 a box, how much is Gander Mountain charging for a box?
Oh, I'd say Gander Mountain for something that's like $7.50 at Walmart. I'd say Gander Mountain is at least $8.50, probably $9.
Yeah, that sounds more like it.
They're always a good 15-20% higher than everybody else.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, before we're getting sort of somewhat near the end, I got to go over the 4 rules of gun safety. So, first rule of gun safety is every firearm is loaded until you physically and visually inspect and ensure that it is not loaded. So remove the magazine, open the action, take a look down the barrel, make sure that there's nothing there, and make sure that when you close the weapon up, you're not going to reload it. Rule number 2 is keep the muzzle pointed in a safe direction at all times. Do not pointed at anything you do not wish to destroy. Rule number 3 is know what your target is and know what's beyond your target at all time. And the most important rule is the 4th rule. Keep your booger hook off the bang switch until you are ready to discharge the weapon. Keep your finger outside of the trigger guard, let it ride alongside the frame. Look up the term trigger discipline and follow that. That's how everything happens. There are no accidental discharges. They are all negligent discharges, and they are all caused by somebody putting their finger on the trigger.
Well,
Yeah,
amen to that, brother.
Yeah, it seems like here in Florida we have a lot of unfortunate circumstances with that kind of stuff because, we do have quite a few guns, and I think that, with our Florida characters, sometimes it causes a bad combination, and we've had, people showing off and they blow their buddy's head off or whatever. I think that Florida especially...
You're bringing up an interesting point that can be very, very sensitive. So would you say that the kind of culture that you're talking about that leads to I'll just say horseplay with firearms, would you say that a lot of that has to do with emulating, for lack of a better term, the rap and hip-hop genre that's either in the movie, the rap-flavored movies, or rap itself?
Well, I think it's for sure that. I would say that it's a good portion of that is because of that, and then there's just the complete idiots that aren't really emulating anything. The Florida, some of the unsavory characters that live some of the trailer parks around here, but a lot of it is that kind of stuff. People trying to be like whatever, some gangster in a rap video or whatnot. I mean, I don't see anything racist about talking about this at all. It's the fact is that really this whole culture was to bring down their community. Really, in a way, ignoring / abetting the continuation of that culture is really the most racist thing you can do.
I happen to agree with you. I know, Chris, you and I had the conversation about, somewhat plans for the future in a perfect world. But I truly think that Lyndon Baines Johnson and his Great Society was not necessarily a good thing. I think his Great Society put a big old hurt on the black people.
Well, he was a traitor to the United States in general, and just ask the USS Liberty survivors that I have interviewed twice on my show about what they think about LBJ.
Yeah, to ask John Kennedy, how's that?
Yeah,
well, we can't ask him, he's dead.
Right, that's what I'm talking about. Exactly. Yep, he had his encounter with LBJ and his little butt buddies.
Well, he had about 3 to 4. The amount of actual encounters gets a little bit blurry. And also, the Texas governor had a couple encounters with the people LBJ was working with.
Conley, yeah, he's another gem in the rough. Jeez. Absolutely. Oh man, I don't know. We practice those disarms. How you holding? I don't know. We call it the homie shoot, where they're holding it sideways. The gangster hold. Right, or the homie shoot. We practice those disarms in class all the time, and it's one of the easiest disarms I think. But that's kind of one of the stupidest moves that's used the most, because these dumbasses they think that that's some kind of cool thing. I don't know, but I can disarm that in my sleep.
Well, I'll tell you what. I've actually tried shooting in said gangsta grip fashion, and I'm not going to say I'm the best shot in the world, but I hit pretty damn close to what I'm aiming at. And if I was to fire like that, my accuracy drops significantly, and I'd say by more than 30%.
Oh yeah, you might as well just throw the bullets at them. We're talking. You know what I mean? Just throw my bullet at you, Brad. And oh my God, there's a video out there where there's a couple of guys shooting like that, and they're grabbing their nuts and they're shooting like that. It's a mock video, but it's pretty funny, I'll tell you that.
And it really doesn't. It doesn't work to hold it sideways. I mean, there is a purpose for. Well, there's a purpose for the sights on the weapon, and they do not put them on the side of the weapon for a reason.
Exactly. It's retarded. Oh, man. Well, I heard it was your birthday coming up this week, dude, so happy birthday.
I'm going to be old. I'm going to be old.
Not as old as me.
That day. I'm not old till that day.
There you go, man.
Yeah, I think for my birthday, I'm going to go and have a large, greasy American cheeseburger and then discharge some copper-coated lead projectiles into several inanimate objects. And, hell, if I get lucky, I might even go out and go bird hunting early on my birthday morning. I'd really like to do that. Bird season's right around the corner here, and I like shooting birds the best.
You should nail a bunch of gummy bears to a plywood board.
There's a pretty good video out there with a guy who shoots a 5-pound gummy bear with several different handguns, and it's actually kind of impressive. The gummy bear stops quite a few of them.
I'll have to check that out.
And I cannot advocate making the body armor out of a gummy bear vest, or making a gummy bear body armor vest, but there's all kinds of things I can't advocate that people do, so whatever.
Well, now you have to title this the Gummy Bear Show.
Gummy bears in self-defense.
Right, there you go.
Right, so,
man.
Chris, do me a favor and pimp your show.
Oh, yeah, Voice of Rebellion Radio Sunday, 9 o'clock, and I think that people will think, well, wait a minute, isn't Sunday a big date? And it is. That is 15 years since 9/11, and that's what we're going to be talking about in depth. And we're going to bring some of the more uncomfortable facts about 9/11, from the dancing Israelis to the Mossad vans, and a little bit more. And also, I might have a guest on this show.
Awesome. Wendy, thank you very much. Chris, thank you very much. Everybody, stick around. A lot better radio than this coming up.